Welcome to the SLP Now podcast. I have a very special guest joining us today. This episode was inspired by the questions I received at the SLP Summit. I was sharing all about how I manage referrals and different strategies to make the workload more manageable. There were so many questions about the legal side of referrals. So I knew that I had to invite David Bateman onto the podcast. He has an amazing wealth of experiences, and he'll do a great job helping us break down these questions. Hello, David. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, and I appreciate the opportunity to engage with you about this. If individuals, after listening to this podcast, would like to email me with a question, they absolutely can. There's enough documents out there that I've authored so people can find me on the web. I'll give everyone my personal email address. Because I get emails from people nationwide every single day, parents, school districts, and my goal is to reduce misinformation and help people move forward so they understand what we need to do, because we're in challenging times related to perceptions of special education. And as we're starting the school year, I just want to make sure that people feel comfortable. I'm betting the people who are listening to this, they know 99% of what they need to do. I'm not being hyperbolic on this one. They know what to do. But if there's a way that I can help give a little bit more backbone so they feel more comfortable when they walk into a meeting, not giving legal advice, I'm just giving educational advice about how to implement these things. If there's something that I can do to be of assistance, don't hesitate to reach out. Okay.
That is so incredibly generous. Thank you. Before we dive into the questions about referrals, can you tell us a little bit of your story and how you ended up where you are today?
I was a classroom special education teacher for a number of years. Then I became a building level administrator, supervising the special ed parts of the programs there. And then I got a PhD in a joint program between the Department of Special Education and the School of Law at the University of Kansas. And then moved to Pennsylvania to be closer to family. And then shortly after, I was picked up as a due process hearing officer and adjudicated over a decade, just shy of 600 due process hearings. Stopped due to insurance reasons. They still work on lawsuits and services for kids with disabilities. I've worked as a hearing officer in several states. I've worked as a mediator in several states, written some manuals relating to complaint investigations. My goal is to reduce litigation because we need to work together and be there for each other. For these parents who are seeking things, they're leading a life that they may not have signed up for. And we need to do our best to help them understand how to move forward. And for the kids, I'm absolutely there for the kids, because these kids have disabilities at no fault of their own. It's not like they wake up and say, I think I'll be eligible for SLP this week, or I'll do autism next week. No, they have a disability at no fault of their own. And we just need to do our best to provide supports for them and help us understand what we can do as a part of it. I've written a bunch of textbooks to help provide services. In the future, I'm going to be working on a textbook relating to Section 504 this fall. If that's something people are interested in, I'll get information out to you about that one.
It's amazing. And in the show notes for this episode, I'll add your email address. I've purchased several of your books, and they're just really great resources. You also have resource on IEPs as well, which you shared in an episode for district administrators. I'll share all of the helpful resources that I've come across that David has created for anyone who's listening and wanting to learn more.
I wrote a document for Section 504. It was written for the 30 school districts I was working with that year, but someone put it online without my permission. It is now, for many states, it is used as their 504 writing document. And I was training in Guam on it last week, and I know that they use it pretty heavily. I'll make sure people get access to that as well. That's what we're turning into a book, because the guidance on 504 from the U.S. Department of Education is going to be probably very little for what we're expecting.
That's great. So many amazing resources to help us make sure we're doing the things that we need to do. I feel like we could have hours and hours of conversation, but let's start off just by talking about the questions that came up around referrals.
Sure.
The questions that we got were related to how much time we have to respond to referrals, and then different states and districts have different requirements around interventions and screenings. So that's the context of what I'm hoping to cover today. What do you think would be the best place to start?
How about we start with the referral process, just to ground us all of what our obligations are on this.
Yeah.
And to help with this, the rationale behind the referral process. That would
Yeah,
help.
let's do that.
Okay. Start from the beginning. Every school district has what's called a child find obligation. It's called an affirmative obligation. You have to seek out and identify, locate, and evaluate all children who may need special education or related services. So if a student shows signs of a speech or language impairment that may impact educational performance, the school must initiate a referral even if the parent hasn't requested it. So it's an affirmative obligation. And when I say affirmative, this makes sure we understand the difference. When someone who has a disability goes to college, the colleges have a passive obligation. Colleges have no obligation to seek out and identify individuals, but schools have an affirmative obligation. It's their obligation to do this. So just start with that as a basic premise. The second one is the referral process. Most likely, the child is going to be referred by a teacher, but a parent or any other school personnel may initiate this referral. The legal timelines under IDA, once a written referral is received, the school generally must obtain parental consent and complete the evaluation within 60 calendar days. Or in some states, it's 60 school days. The law says 60 days. 60 calendar days is less than 60 school days. 60 school days is basically the equivalent of 3 months. In order to do this, you need to obtain parental consent. Without obtaining parental consent, you can't initiate the testing process. So that's the referral process. The next part, though, is you have the obligation, someone initiates a referral, and then we go to the evaluation. For kids seeking to be determined eligible in the category of SLP, a qualified speech language pathologist must be involved in evaluating suspected speech language impairments. The important part about this one is it must be administered in the child's native language or preferred language, not discriminatory, on a racial or cultural basis, and comprehensive enough to determine eligibility and educational needs. This can only occur if parental consent has been provided. Next part, eligibility. Speech and language is a unique category, and I'll explain why it's unique in a second. There are 13 categories we have under IDEA. In order for a child to be determined eligible, the student must have a documented speech language disorder, be it articulation, fluency, voice, or a language impairment. And that impairment must adversely affect the child's educational performance. The other thing about this one is the student must require specially designed instruction or related service. That's where the kicker is. Speech can be a direct service as one of the 13 categories, but it also can be a related service for the kids. There is no other category in special ed that is like that. And so we have to make sure they understand this. But there are students out there who only need speech language services and no other special ed services. And that's a speech only IEP student. A kicker of that eligibility for services under special ed is they have a disability and they are specially designed instruction about this one. Now, if a student has a speech language impairment and does not qualify under IDA, that means it may substantially limit their major life activity, but they don't need instruction, then no requirement for educational impact, that's sufficient. They would be treated as a child under Section 504 for this. And that's something about this one, right? For a student who is a related service, for instance, a student who's already found eligible under the category of autism or OHI, speech language therapy may be a related service that's necessary to receive a benefit from this. So whatever is necessary about this one. Parents need to be heavily involved in this process. They need to be involved in understand what the initial evaluation is. They need to understand what's going on with the child. We need to engage them and talk to them about this one. And if parents do not agree with the evaluation, they can request what's called an independent educational evaluation or challenge the decisions of the school district in a due process hearing or state complaint process. What I'm recommending is that all documentation be written down. You must maintain written documentation on referrals, written documentation on evaluations, written documentations on eligibility and service decisions. And then after that, if the child's found eligible, we write an IEP. I can talk about IEPs for a long time. I state very clearly the frequency, duration, and location and how that's going to be monitored as a part of this. That's the important part. That basically is the process of how we get there. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely makes sense. Is it okay if we dive into some of the specific questions around that?
Sure.
So one of the questions, which I think you already answered, but what counts as a referral? Anytime teacher, parent, or anyone at the school really, if they have a concern, it counts as a referral if it's verbal, written, no matter how it's presented, right?
Well, some states look at this very differently. The federal guidelines typically talk about this one is only a written referral officially starts this, but a verbal concern should trigger the action. What do I mean by this? When I started this process a few minutes ago, I said there's an acronym I want to teach people.
Right.
Let me teach people this acronym real fast because this should help make sense. The acronym is KOSHK. KOSHK. And it stands for when a district knew, as in KNEW, or should have known. Makes sense now, doesn't it? All right. Now you understand why I'm talking about this one. So parent may not give you a written referral, but parent gives you a verbal referral. You're now on notice. You need to pay attention to as a part of this. And so the official clock starts when there's a written referral, but your team is now on notice when there is at least a verbal referral. A legal referral must be in writing and can be from an email, signed by a teacher, request an evaluation. If a parent says, for instance, I'm worried about his speech. Now, that doesn't start the legal timeline, okay? Unless there is a written document about this. But what I would strongly recommend, because of the affirmative obligation that school districts have relating to child find, is parents have said, hey, my child's got a problem. I would recommend that you hold a meeting as a team and say, does this child really have a problem? And just make a determination, yes or no. What's going on? Parent has expressed a concern because just play this out. You ignore that. You ignore that. You ignore that. You ignore that. Parent comes back to you 3-4 months later and says, I told you my child was having problems. They put you on notice. The law looks at when you knew or should have known. You should have known at that point. And we have a child, for lack of all practical purposes, has suffered, has not received appropriate services. We should have done something. We should be the professionals in the room. Now, just because a parent says my child has a problem does not mean a child's going to receive speech language services. Even if a parent brings in a doctor's note, a doctor saying child needs speech language services, just because a doctor says child needs speech language services does not mean child is going to receive speech language services. But what it does mean is you as team are going to meet on this child and try to determine yes or no, is that necessary? If you as a team determine the child doesn't need speech language services, that's okay. But put a reminder on your calendar to meet on this child 4 weeks later. And again, it doesn't have to be a full meeting, but you don't just drop the kid. You hold a meeting, say, does this child need services? If the child 4 weeks later doesn't need services, that's fine. Put another reminder on your meeting 4 weeks later. So you continue to meet. My big problem that I see is districts meet on the child, determine the child doesn't need services, and then they stop meeting on the child. That's it. That's their one meeting for that child for the year. And there are some kids who start to flounder and have significant problems, and parent goes back, I told you about this, and you should have done something about it. The district doesn't have a defense. And we have a kid who's suffered as a result of this. So it's better for the kid, and it's also legally defensible. Right? Does that help understand the difference between the two?
Absolutely. A lot of SLPs are really overwhelmed by the workload. And there's questions too about whether we're allowed to do screenings and what information we can use to determine if the student needs services. I think a lot of SLPs are wondering, is it the safest bet if we receive a referral to try and set up the evaluation? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay. I love screenings. I absolutely love screenings. Screenings are not only allowed, but I recommend them. They come with an important distinction. What is a screening? Screening, as opposed to an evaluation, is a very brief, informal tool that helps you determine might not need further evaluations. We often do them as a part of kindergarten admissions when kids come in to register for kindergarten programs. They're short in duration and do not require parental consent, but they're used to inform, not determine eligibility. If a teacher or parent raises a general concern, screenings would be helpful as part of an MTSS system or early intervention. But you can't require screening before accepting a parent's referral for a full evaluation. You can't use screening results alone. You can't delay child find obligations by insisting on screening when evidence already suggests a disability. Best practice on this one is use standard screening protocol. Use SLPs, design and administer some screenings and ensure follow-ups. No concerns, no further action. Mild concern, monitor or refer. Significant concern, recommend for full evaluation. Screenings are a vital part of the process, and we need to make sure that we use them as a part of it. We do screenings for all sorts of things. We screen for behavior issues. We screen for handwriting issues. We screen for reading problems. We screen for math problems. Keep that parallel with all those. We need to pay attention to that and make sure we use screenings appropriately.
That makes sense. And then, so just to clarify, the most legally safe option, if we receive a referral and there's any uncertainty, we should go forward with the evaluation.
Unless you're like 200% sure the child does not need it. Mm-hmm. But only then, and I'm betting you're not going to need 200% too often. If the parent initiates a referral, because what does the law look at? And let's play this out. Mm-hmm. The law looks at when you knew or should have known. Mm-hmm. You could be on the hook potentially for back services or what we refer to in legal parlance as compensatory education. Okay. Does that help?
Yeah, it makes sense because when we're overloaded by our workload, evaluations take a lot of time. There's a lot of reasons why we would want to minimize the amount of evaluations that we're having to do. But if we're thinking about it from the perspective of the student, if we're 90% sure that they don't need services, but they actually do, and if we're delaying those services because we're trying to make our workload more manageable, then I think it helps to think about the student isn't receiving services when they should be. And so we want to err on the side of caution because the last thing we want to do is have a negative impact on a student.
Correct. I agree with you completely.
We're protecting ourselves legally by doing that because then we'll have comprehensive data showing we made the right decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Before we go to the next question, let me make sure I understand. I like SLPs. And let me tell you why. First, a number of the books I've written have written with a writing colleague who's an SLP. She just stepped down as state director of special ed in Montana. She makes my writing look really pretty and makes me look good. The second thing is when I do witness preparation for due process hearings, SLPs have data. Mm-hmm. Teachers don't. I applaud you immensely because you make witness preparation for due process hearings a dream. I truly mean this. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. The amount of data that you guys have for every interaction with an eligible child is truly a dream. But for most teachers, they don't have that kind of data. And it makes it very difficult to defend what they're doing for a child. And there are often many kids who have disabilities who suffer because we're not taking data. But I just wanted to say thank you to the SLPs out there. All right.
I think as a field, data collection is our superpower.
Oh, absolutely. I truly mean that. Having been involved in probably over 1,000 due process hearings, I never worry about the SLP data. I never worry about that. Yeah. And I applaud you for that. I know it's a burden, but keep it up because it truly is wonderful. You have no idea when a parent is going to get upset with what's going on, and you need to have data to understand precisely where you are with those kids.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like there are so many conversations that we could have. That was one thing that, especially as a newer SLP, I was really concerned about making sure that I was doing things in a legally compliant way. It's hard to get answers to those questions. If anyone listening has questions, send me a DM on Instagram or email me and we can maybe do follow-up episodes. Or if you want to email David directly,
sure.
There are 5 million things that we could talk about, but we'll stay focused. We talked about what counts as a referral, how much time we have, including screenings and how we could potentially use those. When in doubt, it's best to evaluate. What about intervention? In my district, especially as a newer SLP, I've evaluated almost every referral. We didn't have super strong MTSS or interventions. What are your thoughts on the timing of interventions? Because if we get a referral, then that timeline starts and we need to evaluate. Does that make sense? Or do you have thoughts?
Absolutely. You're getting to the crux of what we have to think about as a part of this. How can you do interventions for speech language services without delaying child fund or confusing the difference, like some kids with a dialectical variation or multilingual development with a disorder. So let's get to the heart of this. I think to try to understand this. Can an SLP do interventions without MTSS? Yeah, but with caution. All right. You can provide short-term targeted interventions outside of a formal MTSS process when there's not quite enough evidence. I would think about considering this when the student does not yet show a suspected disability. Make sure the interventions are brief and documented, and there's no delay in the referral. There was a letter put out the Office of Special Education Programs maybe 18, 19 years ago. Schools must not delay or deny a full evaluation just because the student hasn't gone through RTI or informal interventions first. So keep that in mind as think about this one. But yes, you can do this. Let's go back to this disorder versus difference. Okay. Disorder, like a communication difficulty that is atypical for a student's developmental, linguistic, or cultural background. A difference might be a variation in a speech due to culture or if the student is bilingual. If it's a disorder and it adversely affects the student's educational performance and requires specially designed instruction, yes, that would make the child eligible. But a difference, IDA does not consider this a disability, and that's what we have to pay attention to. Okay. What else? Absolutely screen. I determine if further support is needed. Provide short-term support with clear documentation. Monitor whether that's working. But if there's evidence of a suspected disorder, initiate a full evaluation. Don't delay. Don't delay this. But also, as a part of this, make sure you're considering cultural, linguistic, and developmental norms. Document everything and make sure that you have that. Did that help a little bit on that part?
Yeah.
That's a great question. And that's something I think a number of SLPs are wrestling with.
Yeah. And so that's also a strategy that we'll want to put in our pocket. If there's any uncertainty, we'll do the evaluation.
Yep.
We will do an appropriate evaluation to help tease apart the cultural and linguistic factors. In the show notes, I'll link to some of those episodes as well. I think that helps a lot in clarifying what we should be doing. I really appreciated the reframe, especially after my presentation. We were thinking about, okay, how can we streamline the workload and all of that? And there's definitely systems and forms that we can use to make sure we're collecting the appropriate information and not running around trying to get all the things. But I do appreciate that shift on focusing on the student and not unnecessarily delaying interventions. Thank you for that reminder and helping break down the timeline we want to consider, the role that screenings can play, and clarifying some of the questions we had on referrals. Thank you so much.
Happy to help.
It's always a treat to chat, and thank you for all of the amazing work that you're doing out there.